This is every single note in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. I'm going to be going over them mostly in order of appearance. However, they're also going to be grouped in terms of relevance. Feel free to have this in the background while you do schoolwork, munching on some McDonald's, or while you're about to go to sleep. So with all that being said, let's get into the first note. Caution, red smoke. Subject, red smoke. Date, March 18th, 1994. Caution, for those involved with our construction processes, we caution your use of combustion or heat-based elements within environments containing red smoke. Due to the nature of its composition, when exposed to the right pressure conditions, the gas has been tested to react to high temperatures. While its use above can be regulated by environmental sensors and the correct filter equipment, the environments below are not yet afforded such luxuries, which is why the advanced piping leading from our production center above is first on your docket. With higher natural pressure below, the matter is all the more urgent. We caution against the use of lighters, lanterns, and other smaller objects that produce heat. For necessary machinery, we require the use of nitrous cooling equipment to stabilize vehicle temperatures. As always, we wish for quick and efficient work. However, we might help in this matter. Simply let us know. Our thanks, the science staff. While this note seems pretty normal on the surface, we can actually see that this is more foreshadowing to the end of chapter 4, because it's the very same thing that Poppy later tells us when she goes over her plan to blow up the entire factory, including pretty much all of the toys inside of it. But what's also interesting is the date on the note, because it says it was written on March 18th, 1994, which is surprisingly the exact day that this is being written. But what's interesting about it is that this seems to be the construction of the prison, and if the prison was only made about a year and a half before the Hour of Joy, then this would mean that the prototype could have used the prison in order to enact the Hour of Joy. But there's also a second theory as to what this could be referring to, because if the science staff are writing this, then what would they have to do with the prison? Well, if they're building the labs, then it would actually make sense as to why the science staff would be getting involved with Warrenbach construction, especially since at the very end of chapter 4, we see the red smoke surround us. And so if the red smoke is all throughout the labs, then it would make sense why the science staff are warning the construction workers to avoid igniting it. These next notes have to do with the character known as Riley, and if you've already seen my video on Riley, then skip to this timestamp here. Near the beginning of chapter 4, in order to board the prison train, you have to grab a key from what seems to be a rotten Kissy Missy corpse, and once you do this, you can then open a room which allows you to solve the puzzle to activate the train. However, this little Kissy Missy has a deeper backstory than you might have thought. On our way to the prison, we find 5 of her journal entries scattered in the form of notes, and each one of these notes gets darker and darker, making this one of the saddest stories in Poppy Playtime. So let's start with the very first note. I'm gonna read each one and then explain her story as we go on. 2 weeks since the fire. August 8th, 1994. Riley, age 12. First week at Playcare, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what I wanted it to be. There are a lot of people here, and they've given a lot to me. A room, a roof, a big pink bed, girly toys, I'm a little too old for that, and a journal. The adults encourage me to talk to the other kids, but I'm not sure what to say to them. Most of them have been here almost their whole lives, or at least they were young enough that they can't remember what they lost. My parents loved, protected, and taught me, and I'm not sure the others even remember what that's like. They don't know what they don't have, but I do. I remember a lot. I try to be kind to them though, even if there's very little I can say. Right now, I think I prefer it like that. The nice counselor who said I was quiet told me I could say whatever I wanted in my journal, and it would only be for me. Make 2 lists, she said. One with what's important to me right now in this moment, and the other being why. She said it might help me. I'm going to try it. What's important to me? That the nice counselor cares enough about me to try and make me feel at home. Trying to get comfortable here, even if it's not home, it's all I have now. Trying to get comfortable here, even if it's not home, it's all I have now. That my life matters, since it can be lost so quickly. That my parents' lives matter too. Why? Because I'm scared. Anything can happen in an instant and leave you with nothing. And because of that, I'm scared that nothing matters. But I want to feel happy again. Really, I do. And it's important to me right now, in this moment, that someone here cares that I fool at home, even if I'm not. Here, we can see the very starts of Riley's journey in play care. However, what's important to know is that at the very top of the note, it says 2 weeks since the fire. But she crossed this out and instead wrote the actual dates, which is literally 1 year before the hour of joy on the dot. She tells us that she's been at play care for about a week now, meaning in between the accident with her parents and coming to play care, the police were most likely trying to find a home for Riley. She also seems to be a very mature girl for her age, as her writing has pretty much perfect punctuation and she has a great appreciation for her parents, one that most kids don't usually have until they're an adult. She then tells us that the nice counselor told her to write down lists, and this nice counselor is later revealed to be Claire Harper, the same person that we heard in the chapter 3 tape where she described Marie Payne, or also known as the girl who was turned into Mommy Longlegs, as having a very intense nightmare, most likely due to the red smoke. And because of Riley's list, we can see that she's a scared little girl who just wants to feel happy again, who just wants things to go back to the way they were. January 14th, 1995. Being chosen. The other kids talk about it a lot. I still don't know what that's about exactly. If it means being adopted, I'm not sure I even want that. What's important to me? Figuring out if I even want to be adopted. Trying to feel what the others seem to feel day in and day out. Why? If I was happy like them and could feel it like that, maybe I'd appreciate everything more. Maybe I'd want to be chosen too. February 10th, 1995. I've been chosen. Dr. White chose me. For a while, I didn't know I wanted to be, or how I'd feel if I was. But really, I think I'm happy. There were interviews, of course, but I didn't think any of those couples actually liked me. Too anxious, too quiet, doesn't get along with the other kids. And the test scores don't always make a good kid, they often say. But I guess somebody liked me. I asked if I could take out my journal. They said yes, but I wanted to write this out before I leave. I haven't felt like this since before the accident, since my parents. The lists Miss Harper told me about have helped me a lot in recent months. And now, I think I have more for the first list than ever. What's important to me? That I still try to be the girl my parents raised, live by their values so that a part of them is still here, so that their lives mattered, being good to myself and to whoever takes me in, staying happy, finding more friends, getting used to a new home, growing up to help kids that were like me, start an orphanage like Elliot Ludwig, and fill it with toys and good people. In this second note, we can hear that Riley has learned about some kids being chosen. And although this may seem like adoption, we know for a fact it isn't, including one of the tapes named Samuel Lee's Last Day. In the tape, we hear what seems to be a teacher, maybe even a Miss Delight, and she says that Dr. White has chosen Samuel Lee.
And here they all are.
Well, of course. They'd never miss this.
Who's that, Mrs. Brooks? Who's going away?
Tell us. This week, Dr. White here has selected our very own Samuel Lee. Now, before he goes, let's all give Sam one last goodbye, shall we? With me. 1, 2, 3. Goodbye, Sam!
And as you'll see later on in the notes, being chosen by Dr. White is one of the worst things that can happen to a child in play care. And the first part of the note seems to be very short, almost as if she really wanted to write down her doubts about being chosen. However, although she has doubts, she's pursuing after her happiness and realizing that if she's ignorant and just accepts how things are in play care, she could live a happier life. But just about a month after the first entry, Riley was sadly chosen by Dr. White. She says that although she didn't know if she wanted to be chosen, she really thinks that she's happy. And apparently there's an interview process, maybe to go over what your psyche is like in order to pair you with the perfect toy. But the thing is, she thinks that being chosen really just means being adopted. And she briefly mentions that she had good test scores, most likely referring to the game station tests that we see in chapter 2. But since in a chapter 4 tape, when we hear that Sawyer chose one of the Doughy children for his very high test scores, it's likely that Riley's intelligence led her to having extremely high scores in the games.
The subject excels in all physical tests. Reflexes, reaction time, and mental fortitude all tested well above average in game station examinations. So, in spite of said concerns, in Dr. Sawyer's eyes, Kevin is ideal for the project. If we're to create an experiment that can fulfill multiple assigned roles, we can't allow any single consciousness to throw the others off. Even a simple misregulation of emotions means we have 900 pounds of dough that can shift however it pleases and can turn on even those it trusts, simply because it was overwhelmed by a stray feeling. Regardless, Sawyer's word is law, and subjects 1322A and C are to be gathered for processing first thing tomorrow morning.
But it gets even sadder when you realize what Riley wrote down is important. She said that she's trying to be the girl that her parents raised, live by their values so that a part of them is still here, and make sure that their lives mattered. But the very last thing that she wrote shows that she really was a good kid. She says that she also wanted to start an orphanage just like Elliot Ludwig, filling the whole place with toys and good people, just showing that she really cared for others. Quadruple question mark. This wasn't what I thought, what anyone thought. They took me somewhere, not out, but under, deep beneath everything. They gave me a shot, and I went to sleep. Maybe that was days ago, maybe it was weeks. I remember images. My skin opened up like flower petals. A man who looked like a doctor digging around inside of me, taking things out. I remember feeling his touch through my ribs and into the back of my spine. I remember hearing a snap. Everywhere was red. When I woke up, everything hurt, so I screamed. Hours and hours of screaming. I stopped once I knew no one was listening. I'm not me anymore. My body is not my body. My hands are not my hands. I try to brush the hair I still feel at my shoulders and touch nothing. I can't separate my fingers, even though I can almost feel them move. It's like nothing of what I feel actually is. Maybe that's been true for a while now. I'm in a room that's so different from the one I had in the orphanage. Everything's nailed down. I've been here a long time. I'm trying to write the list that helped before, but I've dropped the pen 3 times. I don't know what else to do. Why did I survive if this was all I'd get? What did it all mean if this is where it put me? This can't be all there is. What's important to me? Waking up from this nightmare, getting out, getting back to being me. Why? Because I'd started to like the life again before. And none of this should be real. In a third note, we see what happened to Riley after being chosen. She doesn't even remember the date and just writes 4 question marks at the top of her paper. She describes being taken somewhere deep beneath everything, most likely referring to the labs that we see in the end of chapter 4. But we also learned a lot more about how the toys were experimented on. She says that they gave her a shot, putting her to sleep, but during this sleeping period, she remembers images. She says that her skin opened up like flower petals. A man who looked like a doctor was digging around inside of her and taking things out. And what's interesting about this is that when we compare this to the chapter 2 notes in Elliot Ludwig's office, it seems that the scientists have perfected the process of using the poppy flower. But this sounds really familiar when we look at the chapter 4 tape where Poppy describes her struggles to the prototype disguised as Ali.
Are you feeling okay? I'm okay. Did the bad men hurt you? It's been weeks and weeks of taking things out and putting them back in and taking things out and putting them back in. Over and over and over. Nothing's ever gotten better, and it'll never get better.
She then writes down that after waking up, everything hurt, leading to her screaming for literal hours. She describes her new body as not having hair and fingers that can't separate. And since we eventually see her in the train car, we can see that she was turned into a Kissy Missy doll. She also says that she dropped the pen 3 times, which is very interesting because in chapter 2, when we see the bigger body's version of Kissy Missy, she fails to flip a lever, which might have just been an accident, but now that we read this, it's possible that the Huggy style experiments all have hard times doing precise actions like writing. She then tells us that she wants to wake up out of this nightmare and live life the way it was before, but sadly, this is not the end of her nightmare. The room started moving. I'm not sure what that means or where I might be going. I'm scared, but I'm trying to. Something happened. Everything is upside down. There's a hole in the room, but everything outside is so loud. They're screaming everywhere. I'm better off in here for now. I'll cover the hole with something. It sounds like everything is quiet now. Don't think it's even been an hour since it all started. No one's tried to get in here. I think I'm gonna head outside. There are bodies everywhere, piles and piles. They look like me. What's happening? Finally calm down. Have to be calm. Have to think clearly. Have to get out. I'm gonna see if anyone's around. There's a man inside the construction vehicle. I tried banging on the glass. I don't think he can hear me, and he isn't moving. I have to get back to my room where it's safe. Figure out what happens now. Now, although it might not be explicitly said, this note talks about Riley surviving the hour of joy. And what's interesting is that this would mean that these notes take place over the period of an entire year, because like I said earlier, the first note was written a year before the exact date of the hour of joy. She writes down that her room started moving and she has no idea where she's going, but the thing is, she stopped writing and then started talking about screaming being everywhere. However, once everything got quiet, she says that she was gonna head outside, and once she did, she saw piles and piles of bodies. She then calmed down, tried to think about everything clearly, and even tried to bang on the glass of a construction vehicle to get a man's attention. But what's important is the last thing she mentions, where she says she's gonna head back to her room. This place is a prison. I didn't know I thought it'd be, but it wasn't this. I mean, what did I do wrong? They made me into this and put me in a cell. There must be hundreds, maybe even thousands of others here. How could this happen? There's no food here, only the bodies, and I refuse to eat them. The train, that's what takes everyone here. The conductor's dead, but he has a key that makes the train move. I didn't know there were people elsewhere, or if they intend to come back here with more like me. I'll take the key, make sure no one else can come here. I'll put it where no one can find it. I didn't know how little or much my life mattered, but I can do this one thing. Maybe it'll save someone, anyone, even just one person. That would be enough. Nobody else should hear what I've had to hear inside this place. Nobody else should know hell like this, or the demons that live there. What's important? That I helped someone I wanted to someday when I thought I was adopted. That my life mattered to someone. Why? so that I'll know wherever I go now, hopefully to my parents, that I fulfilled a little of what I said I would and made life just a little better for someone else, even if this place took everything else. In her final notes, she realizes that this place is a prison, and just as Poppy described it in the Untitled tape, Riley says that the only food there is are the bodies, but she refuses to eat them. She says that the train conductor is dead, but he has a key which makes the train move. So she took the key and hid it where no one would be able to find it. She says that no matter how little or how much her life mattered, in doing this one thing, she hopes to save somebody, even if it's only one person, and says that wherever she goes now, hopefully to her parents, that she's fulfilled a little bit of what she said she would do. And this honestly seems to be referring to the afterlife, as her parents have passed away, and because we find her in the train car with the key, it seems that she starved herself. And the person that she ended up helping was us, and we used that key to enter the train and make our way into the prison. And if she knew what she had done for us, I think she would believe that her life had purpose, as with this key, we're one step closer to putting an end to absolutely everything that Playtime Co. had started. Although Riley may have felt hopeless in the moment, we managed to help make her life meaningful. Weekly Checkup 1172, week ending December 23rd, 1994. Subject 1172. Original procedure date November of 1990. Reasons for observation: emotional dysregulation, overactive autonomic nervous system or acute stress response, and episodes consisting of shaking, heavy breathing, and decreased concentration. When giving writing implements, 1172 has communicated to the best of her ability high levels of stress, feelings of impending doom, and a strong desire to return to her previous living quarters. These reported feelings and accompanying symptoms began following 1172's transfer to the shelf and originally rendered her unable to complete assigned tasks. Recently, however, 1172 has shown gradual but steady improvements. Research staff have noticed a drop in number of emotional episodes, as well as shortened duration when they do occur. One factor of improvement is believed to be scheduled periods of supervised socialization with other subjects within the block. This measure was personally requested by Stella Graber and has had a positive impact not only on 1172 but several other subjects. Subject continues to rub the fur on her arms, most likely unconsciously in response to stress. Conclusion: at this rate, it's believed 1172 will not need corrective intervention, medical or otherwise, after all. While still reporting negative feelings, subject is back to a state of functioning such that she can return to her tasks. For the time being, the research team recommends physical work in a quiet setting, waitlist for corrective procedures, no change, transfer out, to be filled by the department head, transfer destination, storage B, department, production. In this note, although you might have already picked up on it, this is pretty much screaming at us that this is Kissy Missy for multiple reasons. The first being that the experiment's number is 1172, which is just 2 experiments after Huggy Wuggy. The second being that in the note, it also says that she rubs her arms most likely due to stress. And lastly, it says that her transfer destination was storage B. And since we know that Kissy was in storage B in the video uploaded to Mob Entertainment's YouTube channel, we can safely assume that this letter is talking about her. But what's also interesting is that it seems the prison is the home for all experiments, all the way up until they're given a task to do in the factory. And this adds even more evidence to the first note talking about the labs, because if they were talking about building the prison, then this wouldn't necessarily line up with Kissy's creation date being the year 1990. But we also see that Kissy is struggling a lot in terms of her health, as she displays both emotional dysregulation and has episodes of shaking, heavy breathing, and decreased concentration, which reminds me of the chapter 4 phone call, where as soon as the prototype starts to talk, we immediately see Kissy start to shake. And this could be because of her transplant, as we know that a few of the toys had loss of mental functions after turning into toys. For example, Boxy Boo, and Pianosaurus. And so it seems that Kissy might actually be living in a constant nightmare where she's afraid of almost everything and it's hard for her to stay calm, leading to her developing these habits like rubbing her arms in times of stress. But what might have been hard to pick up is the fact that the letter said that Kissy was originally thought to be unable to complete assigned tasks, otherwise rendering her completely useless to Playtime Co. But because she's shown a steady improvement, the research staff seem to have deemed her to be useful, and that's why she could have been transferred to Storage B. However, it seems like Huggy Wuggy was the more successful experiment, as he seemed to have been placed on display in front of absolutely everybody, as we see in the Hour of Joy tape, as he was known to be obedient at all times. But what's good about this is that the letter says that Kissy won't need any corrective intervention, medical or otherwise, which could be referring to some sort of surgery where they could rewire her brain or even give her some kind of therapy, which would most likely be extremely painful, in order to try and fix whatever problems could be going on. Before I get to the next notes, I want to say that these notes are known as the Cole Journal, where an employee named Cole writes down his experience in Playtime Co. all the way up until the Hour of Joy, where he wasn't even killed immediately, but rather thrown back into the prison by the very experiments who used to live there themselves. And what's even crazier is that Cole's journal explains literally the entire plot of Project Playtime and clears up so many confusions, like how Leith Pierre was still alive after the Hour of Joy. Cole Journal, Entry 1. Reassignment. Old Cole isn't a resource extraction specialist anymore. He's a shelf keeper, basically a prison guard. I don't know how I should feel about that. The letter they sent me seemed nice enough, commending me for fixing their mistakes. I should be grateful, I suppose, but I know I'll wake up tomorrow and the reality will hit me as it has every morning since the incident. My friends are gone. Dozens went to clean up their mess, but only a handful came back. That guilt ate me up. Probably always will. Those of us left got a pat on the back for doing what was expected and were promptly dropped into whatever new role Playtime could find for us. Me, they put down here with them. The things that killed my friends, that would kill me too if they had their way. I've sat alone in my apartment for countless nights now, thinking it all through. The faces of my friends and coworkers, their families, they all come to me, and in the morning, I'm there with the monsters who killed them. Maybe I'm exactly where I need to be. I can make sure they stay down here in the deepest, darkest hole imaginable, right where they belong. In this first note, we hear that Cole used to work as a resource extraction specialist, aka the very job that you do when playing Project Playtime. But he starts out the letter by saying that he's now a shelf keeper, or pretty much just a prison guard. He's then a little bit confused as to how to feel about being haunted by the past of what seems to be the cleaning up of the theater incident. He says that dozens went in to clean their mess, but only a handful came back, which is literally the exact same thing that happens in Project Playtime. You're given instructions by Leith Pierre to go into the theater and find toy parts and get out of there. Meanwhile, Huggy, Mommy, and Boxy Boo are all trying to kill you, which then begs the question, were those three responsible for the theater incident? Well, if they were, then this would be some absolutely crazy lore. But let's focus on the rest of the letter. Cole says that those who were left got a pat on the back for doing what was expected, and then were promptly dropped into whatever new role that Playtime Co. could find for them. But the thing is, Cole was put down with the very toys that killed his friends, and says that if the toys weren't locked up, Cole would be killed by them just the same. And he also tells us that he's been sitting alone in his apartment for countless nights, thinking it all through, meditating on what's really going on. He says that the faces of his friends, his co-workers, and their families all come to him. In the morning, he's right there working with the very monsters who killed them. But he looks at the bright side and says that he can make sure that they stay down in the deepest, darkest hole imaginable, right where they belong. Almost as if he's trying to make sure that this never ever happens again. And because Cole was part of this extremely traumatic traumatic experience and also literally running for his life from toys like Huggy, Mommy, and Boxy Boo, it's possible that whatever happens to him next could break him. Cole Journal, Entry 2. Last week, Stanley was attacked on duty. He's one of the nice ones down here. He even feels bad for those things. Tries his best to sneak candy and toys to them between shifts. He thinks most of us don't notice, but we do. The soft-hearted idiot thought he could sneak food to Boxy after hours. Just walked right into the cell. Had it not been for a few other guards stationed nearby with tranquilizers, he wouldn't have made it out. I visited him in the infirmary the morning after it happened to see if he was alright. I always knew the guy was a bit of an airhead, but to walk into a cell like that, and with one of the big ones no less, that's just downright stupid. I asked him why risk it? What's it to him? Why does it matter? He was quiet for a little, like he was afraid to tell me. They're not just beasts, Cole, he finally said. They were more than that once. I asked him how he could believe that. Been watching, he said, paying attention to things, reports, eyeing some of the stuff the scientists pass between one another. After a while, I got him to keep that crazy talk to himself and made him promise not to snoop like that again. Told him to get some sleep, but ever since our talks, I haven't been able to get anything he said off my mind. It can't be true. I've seen what those things can do. I mean, they're 12 feet tall for goodness sake. How can they be anything other than monsters? It's silly, it's stupid, and whatever Stanley's trying to say, he's wrong. In this second note, we can see that Cole is starting to break. He heard of an incident where another employee named Stanley was attacked by Boxy Boo because he literally walked into his cell and tried to give him some food. And so Cole visited him in the infirmary the morning after it happened to check up on him. But during their conversation, it seems that Stanley was snooping around Playtime Co. in order to figure out more about the experiments, telling Cole that they're more than just beasts. But because Cole either wanted to protect Stanley's job or didn't want to face reality, he tried to convince Stanley to keep all of this to himself and quit snooping around, which seems to have worked. However, in the very end of the letter, it seems that Cole is denying the reality that although these experiments behave like monsters now, they were actually kids once. In fact, the very orphans from Playcare. But this also has other implications, because if he sees them as former children, then he can't just blame them for being heartless monsters for killing his friends. But when he's denying what Stanley said so many times in his own letter, it almost sounds like his conscience is convicting him to delve deeper into what Stanley's talking about. Otherwise, he would have just brushed it off as Stanley being a little crazy. And we actually do get to see him change his mind in the third note. Cole Journal, Entry 3. I couldn't get the thought out of my head, what Stanley was implying. I always believed they were homegrown, maybe animals or something, but not people. I mean, what about a giant toy with an appetite for men and women screams, "Yeah, I'm a person"? Snooping around documents for the eggheads is a punishable offense, and if the rumors about punishments here are true, then that means being careful is a must. But too many people have lost their lives to these things for the rest of us to be blind and accepting that we can keep them under control and that we can trust Playtime at their word. I've looked into these things a little bit. I know the guys that guard the archives room. They keep a tight ship, but in the right setting with the right type of mood, their lips get real loose. They let slip the process and code for getting in. While security feeds were down one night, I went in. I didn't get very far, but I grabbed a few prisoner profile documents. The observations were from one Dr. Harley Sawyer, not a name I recognize, but the observations mention people. I'll be investigating further, but I'm starting to worry that Stanley might have been onto something. Here, we see that Cole's conscience was convicted enough to literally go snooping around for more information. He says that he couldn't get the thought out of his head and that Stanley might have been right. And although snooping around for documents is a punishable offense and Playtime is known for feeding ex-employees to Boxy Boo, he decided to be extremely careful with how he went about it. He ended up finding a few prisoner profile documents where he found the name of Dr. Harley Sawyer. But what's even worse is that in his observations, they mentioned people. Cole Journal, Entry 4. It happened again. The experiments broke free. I don't remember much. All the doors opened and I was pinned to the floor by something big. everything went black. I woke up in one of the same cells the experiments were in. I could hear other guards next to me, above me. They were screaming, pleading. It reminded me of the experiments, the way they'd smash against the walls, baring their teeth and trying to act like they weren't afraid. It's funny that I haven't thought of home yet, locked in this cell. Honestly, I haven't thought of home in a long time. That was another life, another me. No, the only thought that comes to mind is how inevitable this all was. They hurt us and we hurt them back. We hurt them and they hurt us in return. Over years and years of countless incidents, this is the way it's been. Nobody cares to stop it and nobody's innocent anymore. We made them and they've made us. We've been prisoners to a cycle down here in the dark, and I don't think any of us deserve to see the light anymore. If you ever find these notes, please, whoever you are, never let another hell like this exist. Otherwise, it'll consume you and all your good intentions. If you ask me, all of us, we're in the deepest, darkest hole imaginable, right where we belong. In Cole's final notes, we see that he wasn't killed immediately after the Hour of Joy, but actually captured. And although the note doesn't necessarily say it was the Hour of Joy, because of another note that I'll go over later in this video, we learned both that this was from the Hour of Joy and which block that Cole was kept in. But what's even more interesting is that Cole says it happened again, and if the experiments managed to escape in a big group before the Hour of Joy, then could this be referring to the theater incident? Or could it be referring to his friends dying once again? Because if his friends died in the theater incident and the Hour of Joy, this would make perfect sense. But Cole wasn't killed immediately, but was pinned to the floor by what seems to be a bigger body and taken to one of the cells, which is weird because we know that the prototype orchestrated the entire Hour of Joy. So does this mean that the prototype ordered for certain people to be captured? Well, it's possible that because of the prototype's deep hatred for those who were involved with the experiments, he could have had the security guards taken and tortured because of the torture that they were doing to the experiments all those years. But in the end of the note, Cole has a realization that the experiments aren't the only monsters in Playtime Co., but the employees themselves were the monsters this entire time, because in the very end, he says what he said in the first note, but this time referring to both the experiments and employees. But now, moving away from the notes and talking about the tape that we get of Cole in chapter 4, I am so confused on how all this is supposed to line up, because in the tape, we hear Cole talking to a man named Norm, and in the tape, Cole just casually mentions to Norm that whatever the experiments are, they aren't people anymore.
Right. Know what we get in the North? Things. Whatever they aren't people anymore. Their cells might as well be cages. They are animals. Sick. Twisted. Just instincts and anger.
But here's the thing, it took him a while to even want to believe that they're humans. It took him even longer to realize that they are humans, and yet he's just casually dropping to his coworker that they used to be people. Honestly, this sounds really weird, and it seems like they messed up the timeline just a little bit with these notes. However, it's also possible that after Cole found out some things, it could have spread throughout the company, and the company could have come out about the secret, as Cole does sound a little bit distraught in this tape and honestly not really willing to talk until Norm talks about the toys in the East Wing, giving Cole an opportunity to vent about how the toys in the North Wing are when he's working there. So honestly, there's one of three solutions. Either the Cole here is a different Cole, but that would still be a little bit weird. The timeline got messed up because they could have worked on the notes and tapes separately, or this is Cole after his final note and the news was spread about the experiments being people to the point where everybody knew it. Weekly checkup 1424. Week ending March 21st, 1995. Subject 1424. Original procedure date January of 1995. Reasons for observation: disorganized behavior, thought disorder, confusion, memory loss, catalepsy. Observations. Subject has only fleeting moments of true awareness. Though physically capable of speech, 1424 speech is incoherent, mumbled, and rare. Furthermore, will rarely respond to any questions or commands directly, seemingly disconnected cognitively from their surroundings. Subject's catatonic state is accompanied by catalepsy, a condition which causes loss of muscle coordination and the rigidity of the body. For example, when in this state, if staff raise one of the subject's limbs, subject will not lower it or even seem aware of the stimuli. Subject will eat if food is placed directly in the mouth and will occasionally respond if called by their birth name, though this is rare. Conclusion. The exact cause of 1424 symptoms remain unknown, but were present immediately following their original procedure, waiting for corrective procedures. No change, transfer out, to be filled by department head, transfer destination, department. This has honestly got to be one of the scariest notes in all of Poppy Playtime, because if Doey was experiment 1322 and yet we have experiment 1424 in the game, then what in the world could this thing's ability be? But because of how the note describes the experiment, it almost makes it seem weaker than Doey, because they're observed to have disorganized behavior, confusion, and even catalepsy, which is basically where your muscles are so rigid that if someone puts your arm in the air, you'll just keep it there, like you just don't care. And although he's one of Playtime Co.'s most recent experiments, being made only about 7 months before the Hour of Joy, he seems to lack a lot of cognitive function. Just like some of Playtime's first experiments, he seems to be this shell that, although it's technically conscious, doesn't really operate in the real world. However, because Doey was hinted in a tape in chapter 3, it's possible that this could be a hint to one of the next antagonists that we'll come across in chapter 5. And even though in the notes it seems to be totally harmless, it's possible that in between the few months of this note and the Hour of Joy, they managed to actually fix him. Prisoner profile, experiment 1166. Behavior. Characteristic for these early ilk, 1166 demonstrates an acute lack of higher cognitive function. Complex reasoning, speech, problem solving, and greater introspection all appear either severely limited or altogether non-functional. Physically, it's what it needs to be: strong, agile, swift, and yet I'd hoped for a greater mind behind it. However, 1166 displays an odd sense of loyalty to a select few security staff who nauseatingly feel some kind of sympathy for it, indicative of domesticated dogs and cats. This means its will can be bent. It feels, it fears. I believe this is our first sign of progression, that our processes, while admittedly still rudimentary, are showing us where more work need to be done, and that improvements are possible. Still, 1166, Yarnaby, is an odd, funny little creature. The way it sits in the corner and watches me, playing its funny little music. I'm glad this request was taken seriously. I got a good laugh out of it. It amuses me. Conclusion. I'm gonna isolate it. It'll have contact with no one but me. Considering my importance to the project, it's doubly important that I'm properly protected at all times. And besides, I might get a good laugh or two at the pathetic little sounds it makes. By the time I'm done with it, I'll be its entire world. It'll know nothing else. Signature, Dr. Harley Sawyer. In this note, we see that Yarnaby was experiment 1166, meaning he was one of the first experiments that Playtime Co. managed to have success with, as experiment 1160, just 6 experiments earlier, managed to garner success in the form of Boxy Boo. But because Yarnaby was one of their first experiments, obviously not everything went right, and Sawyer takes note of this, saying that Yarnaby demonstrates an acute lack of higher cognitive function. But the thing is, he still behaves like an animal, or more specifically, like a dog. And because Harley Harley noticed this, he thought that Yarnaby's will could be bent, that he wasn't just some mindless beast, but rather more like a dog that you could actually show love and affection to. And Sawyer's conclusion was to isolate Yarnaby, completely separating him from the outside world. Because if Yarnaby could manage to gain affection from the other employees, then if Sawyer completely isolates him and becomes his entire world, then Yarnaby would be like a loyal dog to Sawyer. But what's even more interesting is that Sawyer says that it's doubly important that he's protected at all times when interacting with Yarnaby, which is weird because how is he going to be protected going into a room with a giant lion-like creature that could literally kill him with just one swipe? Well, this leads me to believe that the Sarley Hoyer robots could have been made for Sawyer to interact with the experiments while not being there physically. And although it's possible he made the Harley Sawyer bodies after the Hour of Joy, it's also possible that he could have used these bodies in order to interact with all of his experiments after each transplant. Prisoner profile, experiment 1163, assigned position, testing. Behavior. Much like its predecessors, 1163 displays none of the typical human qualities. Whatever is left of the bright, joyful bundle of laughter, per the counselor's report, appears limited or altogether depleted. A shame, I suppose. I grow tired of creating mindless invalids. 1160 had his uses, but 1163 lacks the cunning or the size for a similar role, and that's not what the initiative is about anyway. 1163's temperament is like that of a rabid animal. It snaps at perceived motion, eats whatever fits in his mouth regardless of appetite, combats the conditioning staff, and it cannot even play its insipid piano rhythms in tune. Perhaps one of the others from its line would have presented better music. Had any of these actions been the result of conscious thought, perhaps I would be intrigued. I am not intrigued. Conclusion. Use 1163 for testing. If it survives, keep it there. However, I don't expect it to. This initiative will produce no more experiments such as this. Measurable improvements have to be made. Otherwise, I'll have to reevaluate the effectiveness of those in my purview. Signature, Dr. Harley Sawyer. In this note, we hear Harley Sawyer describing experiment 1163, or otherwise known as Pianosaurus. He says that much like the experiments before him, he doesn't display any typical human behavior, and what's left of the bright, joyful bundle of laughter that it seems Stella or Claire wrote about is all gone now. He's no longer a child, but now a monster. But Sawyer doesn't stop there and says that he's growing tired of creating mindless invalids. They were subhuman to him, just pawns in his larger game. He describes Pianosaurus as being like a rabid animal, snapping at perceived motion, which honestly I have to give him credit here because this is exactly what he did to us in chapter 4. Bro literally heard us fall down and came to eat us in less than 10 seconds. And just like we saw in the short that Mob Entertainment released where Pianosaurus couldn't really play his piano keys, Harley Sawyer says that he can't play them in tune, most likely meaning that Pianosaurus's intelligence was severely limited due to the transplant. But what's even worse is that Sawyer says to use Pianosaurus for testing, and if he survives, to just keep him there, showing that Sawyer doesn't care one little bit for the experiments and was willing to send Pianosaurus to testing until the day that he died. But to Sawyer's surprise, I don't even know if he knows this, but Pianosaurus died literally a couple hours before he did. That is so funny. You are a bum. Reconnaissance Report, December 15th, 2004. Elevators? All shut, can't escape. Construction tunnels? Could lead on forever, easily lost inside. Probably has the same freezing traps that No Man's Land does. Can't do that to Dowie. He's all that keeps us safe. Doctor knew that when he had them planted. Cell blocks, north. The worst of the worst there. Doc uses that. No Air Force there. East. Guard station and barriers appear intact. Strictly within the doctor's control, and rabbits are everywhere. Lost too many to them already. Northeast. The doors on all sides are barricaded. All my usual tricks can't get me in. Feels off. West. Skeletons and claw markings in all the cells. Seems people were kept there after the hour. Can't let the little see this. Northwest. Too many bad memories. We need hope, not hopelessness. Barracks. might run on its own emergency power. Security designed to kill us might be turned off. It's a choice between what we know will kill us and what might. For me, that's easy. Little choice, no path out, casualties high, only one place left. I hope we can live with it. In this note, although we don't know who wrote it, it seems to be one of the leaders inside of the group of toys who don't follow the prototype. They seem to be trying to find some sort of home, which means they most likely weren't in Safe Haven until about 2004 or 2005. As this paper was written in December 2004. The writer goes over different cell blocks, with all of them not being good options. But what adds a little more lore to this note is the fact that when you turn it over in your inventory in-game, you can see the words, "Lost Hoppy today. We're heartbroken, trying to find the..." Which means that Hoppy most likely died sometime around December of 2004, which means we were very close to being able to meet him, but it seems that the prototype got to him first. And so although this doesn't provide too much lore, this note is important for the next note that was written about a month after this one. Reconnaissance Report, January 10th, 2005. Prototype's been finding ways past the traps. Don't know how. Have to keep changing the setups to keep him away. He was right outside the door last night, just staring and tapping at the wall. All I can think about since is that clinking of metal, those spidery legs, that face. We've double checked every entrance, made sure this place is good and locked down. Still, who knows how long these defenses will last? We're completely surrounded now, all sides, even above and below. Nowhere left to run to, no place left to hide. End of the line. In this note, although it doesn't really tell us where the toys ended up setting up their base, we can assume that they set up shop in Safe Haven, as this was written in the exact same year that we show up. And in the note, it seems that the prototype is trying to freak out and intimidate the toys that are trying to rebel against him. He was described as just staring and tapping at the wall, and by the way he did it, it seems he really got into the mind of whoever was writing this note, as he's troubled by the clanking of metal, his spidery legs, and even the prototype's face, which is very interesting because in chapter 3, when we see the prototype shrine, he has a giant metallic body, which we saw in chapter 4, but the shrine also has a skeleton wearing a construction hat coming out of its mouth. And because of this note, we can safely assume that the prototype has some sort of human body coming out of his mouth, or at least a human-like face. Propaganda flyer. Poppy leads you to the grave. You fight not to survive, but to die. See where this has gotten you. It is not too late to change your mind. Join us, and we will spare your lives. You have 24 hours. We will not make this offer again. Because this note doesn't necessarily have a date to it, we can't say when it was written for sure, but because it's written on similar paper like the reconnaissance notes, we can assume that it was most likely written around the same time as then, being late 2004 or early 2005. And in the notes, it seems to be some sort of offer to the Safe Haven toys to give up and join the prototype in going against Poppy. As the top of the note says, Poppy leads you to the grave. And if they change sides, then what would they be joining? Wouldn't the war be over? There wouldn't really be anything left to join. And although we don't know who wrote this, because of the way the prototype speaks in some of the tapes, it's possible that he's the one writing this. However, with this dude's finger looking like Edward Scissorhands, I'm kind of doubting that he was able to write this. But it's also possible that he told someone else to write it in his words. Project overview, Safe Haven. Project name, Safe Haven. Project manager, Darwin Silva. Project lead, Cyril Warrenbach. Project goals, create a reinforced, easily defensible central location for security staff, equipped with blast doors, defenses, and multiple emergency entrances and exits. Project objectives, design and implement an independent electrical network, including an on-site generator. Wire a series of high-voltage electrical coils into the network, capable of deterring intruders. Install reinforced blast doors capable of withstanding external pressure greater than 50 psi. Construct 3 to 4 exterior pathways, each with reinforced doorways and failsafes. Secondarily, construct a discrete emergency elevator system capable of transporting key personnel from upper floors. Project timeline: 10 to 12 months. Potential limitations/setbacks: misprioritization of overall prison construction, needs further clarity, worksite hazards, budget constraints. In this note, we read of Safe Haven's construction, where a man named Darwin Silva was the project manager, and because Silva is more of a rare name, we can assume that this is the very same Silva whose life was threatened by Eddie in one of the Chapter 4 tapes, which, if you didn't know, Silva started asking questions because his conscience was convicting him of building a literal prison for a toy company. However, Eddie brought him very close to a cliff and basically threatened his life if he didn't complete the project.
I don't like what I'm supposed to be building here. Look, the game station, whatever. It'll be fun for the kids. But this, what in the world would a toy company need with a prison? It's a game. Something for the kids. Anything.
In 1972, you signed a contract, a legally binding piece of paper that says whatever is asked of you, you do it. In 1990, you signed another. So now you do the work because we've given you a directive.
Mr. Ritterman, we're near the...
Yes. Yes, we are. All of us are. On a ledge.
And here, we see the project's goals and objectives for what was known as Safe Haven, which is interesting because at first, you would assume that the toys named it Safe Haven, but it seems that Playtime Co. was the one to name it. And with the construction of Safe Haven, 3 of the more important objectives were these. 1, they needed their own electrical network including an on-site generator. 2, they needed 3 to 4 exterior pathways, most likely so they wouldn't get stuck. And 3, they also needed reinforced blast doors capable of withstanding external pressure greater than 50 psi, which, if you don't know exactly how much that is, let me put it in perspective for you. That would be equal to about 864,000 pounds, or about 400 metric tons beating against that door without collapsing. That is literally the entire weight of Doughy the Dough Man. And these indestructible vibranium doors is probably the reason why the Safe Haven toys were able to survive this long. A cryptic letter. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ayers, we can give him back to you. Your son Jack can live. Show this message to no one. 6 weeks from the time of receiving this letter, return to the Playtime Co. factory. Someone will be waiting for you there. A friend. Although this note is extremely short, it's gotta be one of the most juicy ones for lore, because this note is in between the first tape that we see before playing the game and the tape that we see near the end in the Foundation. In the very beginning, after the commercial, we see Jack Ayers fall into a vat of dough while on some sort of factory tour with his family, and with his mom trying to save him before he fell over. She was probably deeply affected by this and even blamed herself for the accident. But it seems that they assumed that Jack was as good as dead, because in this note they say we can give him back to you, saying that Jack can live. And whoever this is, or whoever this friend is, says to show this message to no one, and 6 weeks from receiving the letter to return back to the Playtime Co. factory. And this is really similar to the letter where Leith Pierre hires Harley Sawyer, because all they say is that someone will be waiting for you there. And in Leith's letter, he says that Sawyer will recognize him when he sees him, but that's besides the point. This arc of Jack's character is then finished with the tape that we get in the Foundation, where we see Jack's parents come back to the factory, where a scientist is with them and they're ready to meet Doughy. However, because Doughy literally just woke up not more than a few days ago, I think the scientists knew exactly what they were going to do, and they were sending Jack's parents straight to their death, as the scientist let them walk inside alone during his adjustment period and doesn't open the door when he's literally begging for mercy. Scientists don't even say a peep, probably just watch this dude from the outside window with some Grinch grin, just like sliding his hands back and forth.
That's not even human.
Let's just talk to him. You'll see. Can we talk to him?
Yes, ma'am, you certainly can. Go on in, whenever you're ready.
The gentle voices lie. I know what they do. They lie, and they poke, and they hurt. Susan, get away from me!
Jack? Mommy won't lie to you, Jackie. Mommy won't hurt you. I'd never hurt you.
Hey! Hey! Open this door! Open the door! Please!
Subject 1322C report. For all intent and purposes, Matthew Hallard is a dream child. He's thoughtful, kind, considerate, understanding, and while maybe not as intelligent as some of the other children, averaging only B to C level work in school, nor as physically gifted, he more than makes up for it in his charm and charisma. There's nobody down here who isn't fond of the boy. It's just a shame that he came to us already a boy of 15, well into his puberty. Most parents look for a child a lot younger. He understands. Though he rarely speaks on it, I know Matthew suffers from deep insecurities. I've read the reports on the accident that put him here. He blames himself for the family he couldn't save. I believe he's on the road to healing, but the way is long and nobody mourns the same. He's becoming somewhat of a leader to the younger children though, even reading them books late into the afternoon. We allow it, sorry. The Adventures of the Word Wizard is his favorite. They listen to him when he breaks up fights in the playhouse and hang on almost every word he says. And seeing him like this, assuming this role, I think it's what he needs. Should he age out, I might even request bringing him onto staff. He is a good candidate for 1322C, should his personality mesh with the other two. But please, be gentle if you pick him. He's a fine young man. The future we're fighting for would be a waste if we sacrifice too many like him. In this note, we see a report of the third Doey child, otherwise known as Matthew Hallard. Most of this note is comprised of a report written by Claire Harper, but with a note attached written by Stella, which honestly tells a lot about the staff here, because in one of the chapter 4 tapes, we realized that Stella had to be told at some point that the orphans would be turned into experiments. However, Claire Harper, not being in the same position of authority as Stella, seems to not really know what was going on with the experiments, at least at this point, because she says most parents look for a child a lot younger, that Matthew is a dream child and he's gonna assume a role, but she doesn't necessarily mention that he's a subject like Stella does. So it seems that Claire didn't know what was going on, which is why Stella added on a tiny note at the end saying that he is a good candidate for 1322C, and if that they do end up picking him, not to waste him, because they need to fight for the future and can't sacrifice too many like him. And using the word sacrifice clearly shows that Stella knew exactly what was going to happen to him. However, we also learn a lot about Matthew in this note. We learned that he was a really good kid, becoming an orphan a lot later in life as he arrived at Playcare when he was already 15 years old, to the point where Claire says that if he ages out or maybe turns 18, that they should bring him on to staff and have him work at Playtime Co. Because although he's about average intelligence and not really physically gifted, he makes up for it in his charm and charisma, and not necessarily in a manipulating way, but that he's naturally a leader and comforting to the other kids. He's almost like a parent to them. He even reads books to them, which is very interesting because the book here is called The Adventures of the Word Wizard, which is also in an unused voice line from Doey in chapter 4.
Hey, if you... well, that is, if you have the time, there's something else I'd like you to watch out for. The Adventures of the Word Wizard! You found it! I... Thank you! We used to read this all the time in the orphanage. All of us lined up in a circle on the floor. And even after having heard it 1,000 times, even if you were too young to really get the meaning, each and every face would still be smiling the second the first word was read.
It seems to be some sort of side quest where Dewey asked if we could find his book, and when we did end up finding it, he says that the orphans would read this over and over and over again. Even if some of them didn't understand what was going on, the kids would love it. Secondary lab instructions. Remember, follow all diagrams and anatomical guides during deconstruction. If it helps, just sing that old song to yourself for the order of operations. The one your parents taught you, thinking you weren't smart enough to delineate the parts of your body. FYI, the foreman of the Misfit Pit asks for new meat. Whatever experiments can't be salvaged, keep it quiet and send them there. She can make use of them, however perverse it may be. This note doesn't seem to have too much to do with the story of the game. However, it is a little bit interesting in comparison with the heartlessness of the next note that's similar to this one. Here, it seems like this is really just a hint for us to continue the game, because we find it in the red smoke puzzle where we find the different corpses and their numbers in order to make a code. But it also says that the foreman of the Misfit Pit asks for new meat, and so whatever experiments can't be salvaged, to keep it quiet and send them there. Meaning they're most likely going to be turned into food for the others, just showing that if you weren't useful to Playtime Co., they would find a use for you. Secondary lab mission statement. Dr. White. This letter acts as acknowledgement of your new position, as well as a restatement of your goals and expectations. As the head of the secondary laboratory, it will be your responsibility to maintain your staff and adhere to pre-established guidelines. You will present each week's findings in the primary laboratory during our pre-established executive viewing times. You will maintain the pre-established code of conduct regarding company secrets and ensure all under your purview adhere to the same codes. I believe if you've the mind your resume infers that you're sensing a trend here. You've now seen tragic examples of men who let ego blind them to the project's actual goals, who let perceived personal gain overwhelm good sense. You'll be better than this, Dr. White. For now, the secondary lab's mission is as follows. Make something useful out of the experiments who won't cooperate. Rip them open again and again until you've salvaged something. Whatever knowledge you still require, you are to extract it from what remains of Dr. Sawyer. He will fight you, but it will do him no good. Everything he knows and thinks is only ever a matter of button presses away. Good luck, and whatever else you may require, reach out to me personally. With regards, Eddie M.N. Ritterman. Here, we see Eddie has written a letter to Dr. White, who seems to be taking the position of Harley Sawyer, as this letter was written after Sawyer was eventually turned into an experiment himself.
Oh no, they didn't. Those backstabbing traitors.
Dr. Sawyer, can you hear me?
White? White, is that you? Who else is in there with you? You enjoy watching me rise like one of them? My head feels like it's split in two. This is wrong. You must have done something wrong.
Some disorientation is to be expected.
Eddie writes to White, saying that as the head of the second laboratory, he's gonna have even more responsibilities, even over those who are underneath him. And so to me, it seems like the red smoke puzzle was the second lab, where less important experiments were done, while the labs that we see at the end of chapter 4 were the primary labs. But Eddie makes sure to be very careful to not let a second Sawyer emerge, because he tells him that if he has the mind that his resume implies, then he should be careful to not be turned into a floating brain. But Eddie also shows his cruelty by telling him to make something useful out of the experiments who won't cooperate, to rip them open again and again until they manage to salvage something. And whatever knowledge he still needs, he's to extract it from Sawyer. But this also tells us a little bit about Sawyer's character, because although Sawyer may be stubborn at first, it seems that they found a way to push Sawyer's buttons and get him to reveal whatever answers they may need. Young Genius's program removal letter. Harley, let me begin with a bit of bluntness. As I know, you appreciate not dancing around what needs to be said. Despite how much it pains me, I've decided to remove you from the Young Geniuses program. I didn't want it to turn out this way, Harley. I didn't want to hurt or discourage you. Yours is a truly brilliant mind, probably the most brilliant of anyone I've ever known. Every day I've seen your drive, your determination, and your incessant need for progress. Working with you, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire life. But even so, I have to be honest with myself and with you, because despite all that I see in you, despite all that you can be, there is one glaring flaw that I can no longer make myself ignore: your lack of humility. Scientific progress should always be to the benefit of humanity. Progress made simply for the sake of progress often winds up hurting us more than it helps. I've tried to temper that in you, as I once had to temper it in myself, but it became clear to me that such intrusions on my part only incited your anger. You finally lashed out on me one evening and stormed out of the lab. "Don't be soft, Elliot," you said. "Progress doesn't care for how anyone feels about it." I knew immediately that you were wrong, but I wasn't sure what to do. What could shift your thinking? In agonizing over it, I was reminded of what ultimately changed me, of what gave me the perspective I needed. It was seeing the world and people again, bouncing back from rejection and hardship through connection. In thinking about those days, I'm reminded that rejection can sometimes be the best thing for us. It can remind us why our actions matter and who they're for. Ultimately, I believe it made me a better person, and I have to believe that doing this now will make you better too. So I challenge you to head for home, Harley, and to look at the people around you, to try for a new perspective, to better know why progress matters. One day, I hope you'll understand. Maybe you'll even thank me, but even still, I'm sorry. Your friend, Elliot Ludwig. So this note already tells us a lot about Sawyer, but before I even get into what was said, I have to go over where this note was found, as it was found right behind where Harley Sawyer was kept, which means that he literally kept this note for all these decades in between being a child to now, which means that Sawyer most likely never let go of what Elliot did to him, keeping this letter as a reminder that Elliot is actually his enemy. In another note written by Elliot, we read that Sawyer was different than all of the other kids, and he took a liking to the boy. However, in between that note and this one, it seems that there was something that happened in between them, as Elliot finally makes the decision to call Harley out on his lack of humility and remove him from the program. Apparently, even as a child, Harley lashed out and stormed out of the lab, telling Elliot not to be soft. But in Elliot's way of loving Harley, he risked their relationship for the greater good of Harley's growth as a person. However, this letter was of barely any effect and seems to have done the opposite of what Elliot wanted, because in the Chapter 4 ARG, we see torn up papers which say, "He took everything. I thought you cared. Nobody cares. Nobody understands. Elliot Ludwig is a soft, pathetic, small-minded backstabber, nothing more." And because Harley kept the note for all this time, it shows that Sawyer never changed his mind and kept his hatred, which is shown throughout everything that he does with the experiments. He treats them as nothing but vessels for his scientific progress, treating them like they're dirt and only useful for his own purposes and progression. An untitled poem. Over felted feet and with bated breath, sleep draws ever near, over paths turning clear. But I am not afraid of death, for we have already met. This has got to be one of the most mysterious notes in the game, until you realize what the description of it says, as it says, a code for those who need it. And so it's possible that if you wanted to get into Safe Haven, you'd have to say this code, almost like they have a password to get in. However, because the prototype and Sawyer have eyes pretty much all over the factory, with Sawyer accessing the cameras and the prototype knowing the ins and out of this place like the back of his own hand, then it makes me curious as to why they would use this poem if those two could easily figure it out. Foundation operator note. Operator, I know this new posting is a weird one, but it's important to what's being built here. Remember, no talking about any of that. Think of it like a promotion. After all, it's you we're entrusting to be stationed here. With the eventual additions of heating, air conditioning, working signal, and a few chairs, it might even feel downright cozy. You'll notice this station is equipped with a variety of compounds labeled A, B, and C. If those come into contact with one another and the red smoke, then you best make sure your cigarette breaks are somewhere else until the system flushes. Otherwise, your bit of relief might come at the cost of a few thousand lives. I've left more detailed instructions for you below. Also, I know we've had this conversation before, but it's important that you not rip forms in half simply because you deem half the note more useful than the other. I have to believe you're better than a barbarian monkey man and that you can show some appreciation for this note. Is a little bit of a weird one, but it's kind of important to the story of chapter 4, as Poppy tells us that we're gonna go down to the foundation and use the mining charges along with the red smoke in order to blow up the factory. And so this note gives us a few more details as to how this works, telling us that if the compounds labeled A, B, and C come in contact with one another and the red smoke, then it's very important that nothing ignites, causing the red smoke to literally blow up. But it seems like whoever this was written to was known for being a more, let's say, minimalistic type of person, as he would tear notes in half and even tear this note in half. Which is kind of bad for us, because the person who wrote it says that he left detailed instructions below, meaning that the more detailed information about how this works was torn off and probably thrown away. But that, my beautiful friends, is every single note in chapter 4 of Poppy Playtime. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and click on this video right here.